Hippo versus white rhino. Alright, now I know my channel profile is a rhino, but I'm not going to be one of those biased fans. There are a lot of merits the hippo brings to the table that can honestly put the rhino to shame, like its aggressiveness and devastating bite. But the rhino can hold its own too, and it also has a few tricks up its horn, but no spoilers. Now I've seen and interacted with both of these creatures in real life, but of course from a safe distance, since, you know, they can easily destroy a human or a car for that matter. Now I've heard the hair-raising grunts of hippos, and seen the ominous aura of a white rhino. And all I gotta say is that they are the undisputed rulers of their terrain. Well, if elephants don't come along, that is. But in general, hardly any animals dare to tempt their fate against these beasts. So, what happens if they meet? Africa's most temperamental animal against a unicorn on steroids. Who wins? Well, the decided verdict may actually shock you, so stick to the end. And hey, before we begin, here is a fun fact. Did y'all know that rhinos only have 3 toes while hippos have 4? Why is that? Well, I sort of addressed this later on in the video. Anyways, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. It will help my channel grow. So with that being said, let's establish some ground rules. Let's say this fight takes place by a watering hole. You know, a neutral territory where both of these animals meet in the wild. Let's also assume both the rhino and hippo are enraged males in their prime and willing to fight one another. Alright, with that out of the way, let's begin the analysis. Size and physique. The rhinoceros. They are huge. In fact, they weigh more than most cars out there. Now, something to take note of is that there are 5 different types of rhinos, but today we'll be focusing on one of the species the hippo actually interacts with for obvious reasons. That being the white rhino. It's the largest living rhino species, and literally every researcher I talk to about it says one thing: it's built like a tank. A typical male southern white rhino weighs between 4,500 to 5,000 pounds, and has a body length of around 11 to 13 feet. Yeah, try bench pressing that. Anyways, the reason why it's referred to as a tank other than its sheer size is because it's extremely wide and has a very muscular neck and shoulder region. It can toss cars around with relative ease, and even bulldozes some large animals like nothing. It basically has to balance 2 horns on the top of its head for its entire life, and the foremost horn can grow pretty long as well. That's not an easy task, especially when you use it as a weapon. So the white rhino is robust to say the least. But what perhaps makes them distinguished from other rhinos is its head. This species of rhino can be recognized by its square-like face and flat mouth, which implies that it grazes on grass. But don't let its herbivory fool you. It can give lions nightmares. And speaking of giving animals nightmares, how does the rhino compare to one of the most terrifying animals? The hippopotamus. It's no surprise these beasts are large, but how big are they? Well, a mature bull hippo typically weighs between 3,000 to 4,000 pounds and reaches between 10 to 15 feet in length. Now, what perhaps makes the hippo such a menace, other than its jaws, which we'll discuss later, is its beefy build. They have very thick skin, which can grow up to 2 inches deep. It's been known to stop some gun bullets, and is even legendary for being one of the toughest animals out there. And despite popular belief, hippos are actually not that fat. Their subcutaneous fat layer is actually thinner than their skin. In fact, hippos are actually mostly made up of muscle. This is one of the reasons why they can submerge rather easily in water. But I digress. When speaking of tough animals, well, the rhino holds a reputation. It too has thick skin that can grow up to 2 inches deep, thus it begs the question, who is more durable? Well, the rhino skin is more coarse and tightly wound around the muscle. Now, does that mean the rhino's body is harder to puncture? Well, the hippo's seemingly smoother and looser fitting skin would bend with the tension of a sharp object easier. Essentially, it's like hitting a wall versus hitting a matted floor. In essence, if we take a lion, for example, it might have an easier time puncturing the hippo's skin, but it would ultimately be negligible. Another thing to consider is the limbs. Who is more maneuverable between these Goliaths? Well, the hippo has shorter and more stubby legs compared to the rhino. and their feet tend to be narrower and have more pointy toes. This suggests that hippos are more adept at moving through the water, and this makes sense given their lifestyle. The rhino, on the other hand, has longer legs with a wider and rounder foot. Their limb and foot anatomy implies that the rhino would have a maneuverability and speed advantage on land. And this makes sense because they are strictly terrestrial, compared to the hippo's amphibious way of life. So when concerning these two beasts, the hippo has a more compact build, a lower center of gravity, and a rounder, beefier body. However, the rhino has longer limbs, more muscular emphasis on its upper body, and a weight advantage. So in general, I would say they both are about equal in terms of durability. But being tanky only gets you so far. How these creatures brawl and their weaponry plays a large role in how fights play out. After all, it is a fight. So this brings me on to my next point, which is weaponry and fighting IQ. Hey, you know what puts fear into people's hearts? Getting chased by a wild, unstoppable animal, and both the rhino and hippo seem to classify in that area. I don't know about you, but I would give these animals a lot of room. You don't want to get on the bad side of a hippo or rhino, but they both have different weapons and fighting techniques that make them fearsome. So, the hippo, what does it wield? Well, what perhaps makes the hippo so infamous is its mean attitude. They are not lacking in anger, and they have the mouth to back it up. If the deep rattling warning grunts doesn't make your heart sink, then their bite surely will. A bull hippo supports large canine teeth that can grow up to 1.5 feet in length. Those teeth could make quick work out of any human or any land animal for that matter other than an elephant and a rhino. And they also have pointy tusks in their mouth which can be used to jab at their opponents. But perhaps its sheer bite strength is what makes the hippo's jaws really deadly. Hippos can bite up to 1800 psi. Just for reference, that's 12 times stronger than what a human can do, and it even far exceeds that of a tiger's bite strength. That's very impressive, but I mean, other than biting, it really doesn't have any other means of attack. Maybe ramming, but it doesn't really need to have another method of attack. Its bite is frightening enough. The hippo can open its jaws at a 150-degree angle, which is more than enough to bite you in half. Alright, so how does the rhino compare? Well, for starters, it has a very muscular neck and shoulder region, even more so than the hippo. This enables its fighting style of ramming, goring, and lifting their opponents off the ground. And when I say the rhino's neck and shoulder region is powerful, I truly mean it. They can knock over cars with ease, and even knock down other large animals. But perhaps we should also mention, well, what makes the rhino so unique, which is its horn. It isn't just for decoration, it's a weapon used to defend itself. And it's rather large. Its front horn can typically grow up to 2 feet in length in mature adults. And yes, the placement of the horn also matters a lot. The horn of the rhino is located at the front of its snout, compared to the hippo's canines, which are located on the sides of its jaw. In essence, this gives the rhino an advantage when driving forward and ramming. And its horn placement isn't just a perk when going against hippos, it's also been proven quite effective at dealing with buffalo as well. So the rhino would have an easier time pushing around the hippo with its muscular shoulder and neck region, rather than the other way around. But mentality is another thing we have to consider. Like I mentioned earlier, hippos have an attitude problem. They are aggressive and don't like to back down. Well, unless you're an elephant. On the other hand, the rhino is typically more skittish and a peaceful giant. You know, the main reason why they attack is because they are confused half the time because they can't really see that well. When given an option, they prefer not to fight, but the hippo, you know, just likes to brawl. Alright, so will the rhino's muscular upper body and deadly horn ram its way to victory? Or will the hippo's aggressiveness and devastating bite prevail? Well, it's now time to determine a verdict. Alright, we have our stats. So, who would win in a fight between a hippo and a white rhino? Well, based on all my personal experience with them in the wild, and referencing their biological stats, I would say the white rhino would win with high difficulty. Both the white rhino and hippo are Goliaths, But the rhino does have a size advantage, and its physique is better built for stabilization and ramming forward. After all, in general, it has a more muscular neck and shoulder region that would give the hippo a hard time when trying to push around the rhino. And I don't know about you, but I think the rhino's horn placement of being in front would make biting the beast a struggle. It's essentially like closing your jaw with an upright pull in your mouth. I can even imagine the rhino getting a few throat jabs in when the hippo is attempting to bite it, which would be of course unpleasant. And yes, the hippo is more aggressive, and initially it may stammer the white rhino, but I think the unicorn on steroids will eventually, well, remember that it's a rhino and fight back. The rhino is also more maneuverable on land, which is where the fight would most likely end up taking place on. And if you pair that up with its physique that's meant for ramming and a horn that won't quit, I think the hippo would bite off more than it could chew. So to reiterate, I think they are both forces to be reckoned with. And in all honesty, the hippo is just more terrifying, especially when I encountered both of these creatures in the wild. But I think the white rhino would win in a confrontation more often than not.